So welcome everyone. This is our final webinar in our year-long series on emerging Midwest invasives. As I just said, we are recording this and it will be posted to MIPIN's YouTube channel before the end of this year. We'll get it up to you before in a couple of weeks. So my name is Michelle Belasker. I'm the coordinator for the Midwest Invasive Plant Network, or MIPIN. And today we're going to be talking about porcelain berry. And I'm really happy to share today that our webinar is being sponsored by Williams Creek Management. And are you seeing my screen advance, Dave?
It has not.
Okay, sometimes it's just a little bit slow. We'll give it a minute here. Let me just stop sharing and try that again.
There it goes.
All right, there we are, back in business. Okay. Yeah, so I want to make sure to highlight our sponsor. We really appreciate all the organizations that have sponsored these webinars throughout this year. And today we're honored to be able to recognize Williams Creek Management. They are consulting contractors with over 20 years of experience and expertise in invasive species management. They have offices in Plainsville, Indiana, as well as Cincinnati. And they provide construction, stormwater compliance, landscape installation, maintenance services across multiple markets in the Midwest. So you can learn more about their projects and their services by visiting their website, which is at the bottom of this slide. And I always like to give a little introduction to MIPIN. So our organization was formed in 2006. We coordinate invasive species outreach and activities across the Midwest. And our mission is to reduce the impacts of invasive plants in our region. And that includes the 9 states you see here on this map, as well as Ontario. And this webinar series was inspired by a survey we conducted at the end of 2022. We've actually been conducting this survey now for the last few years. There's another one currently available if you go to mipin.org. And so if you're an expert who works on invasive plants, we encourage you to take that survey because it informs this outreach work that we do. So at the end of last year, we asked experts across all of our region which species they consider to be early detection. So these are plants that are either not in the Midwest yet, but they're in neighboring regions, or they are here, but they're still in relatively isolated pockets. But in either case, we're really concerned about their potential to continue to spread, and we want to make sure people are aware of them. And so we received feedback from, again, all those states and provinces that you saw listed, and 10 plants really rose to the top of the list. And that formed the basis for this webinar series this year. We also turned this information into a flyer that you can download. So if you want to share information about these plants with anyone else in your network, you can download that at our MIPIN's webpage. Another resource we have for early detection is our Keep a Lookout flyers. We have an aquatic and a terrestrial version. They each feature 16 plants. You can see there's kind of thumbnail images on the front, and on the back there's information identification and what habitats you're likely to find these plants in. And I'll put links to where you can find these in the chat as well. And then finally, I always like to invite you, if you are able, if you've been enjoying, if you enjoyed today's webinar, if you've been enjoying this series throughout the year, please consider making a donation to MIPIN. The donations are through our fiduciary, the Morton Arboretum, and it supports our invasive species education efforts. So just, again, keep an eye on the chat throughout our presentation today. I'm going to put these links and some other resources in there for you. And again, if you have any questions for our presenter, you can put those in there and we will answer them as we are able. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, Dave, and you can go ahead and get started while I introduce you.
I need to hit screen share.
Yes.
Okay.
So with us today is David Gressley. He is the Director of Horticulture at the Spring Grove Cemetery and Arboretum in Cincinnati, Ohio. He's responsible for mapping and cataloging the Arboretum's woody plant collection, and he's very familiar with porcelain berry, the plant we're going to talk about today. He's also an adjunct assistant professor with the University of Cincinnati. So again, very happy to have him with us today. And Dave, you can go ahead and get started.
Thank you for asking me to do this. We're talking about porcelain berry, and it actually goes under 2 different names now. If you subscribe to the original name, it is Ampelopsis brevipedunculata. But if you subscribe to World Flora Online, They've changed the name in 1977, adopting one of what's IDIS considers one of the synonyms, but Ampelopsis granulosa variety Breva pedunculata. Today we're going to go through all the factors that made it a problem. And unfortunately, it follows the same pattern of many of our other invasive ornamentals have taken over the years. And it was acquired during the age of plant expeditions. Its native range is northeastern Asia, which includes China, southeastern Russia, over to the Koreas and across to Japan. It was
Dave, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think we're seeing your notes view
let me
rather than your slideshow view. Yeah.
okay. Is it this one?
Hasn't changed. My view hasn't. Oh, there we go. That looks better.
Okay, sorry about
Yeah,
that.
sorry for the interruption.
Okay, so it was cultivated in 1870, but there's a varietal, Maxima witziana, was cultivated in 1868, but apparently that was not the first one brought over. Used as an ornamental landscape bedding plant, it seems like it would be better off on a trellis the way it grows. It'd be awfully difficult to try and keep it in a bed space with its aggressive growth habit. At Spring Grove and here in Southwest Ohio, it has really become apparent in the landscape, and especially in the last 5 years. We're calling it the kudzu of the North here. It's pretty voracious. Goes by a number of common names. Porcelain berry is in either 2 words or hyphenated. If you were a student of horticulture using Michael Durr's Manual of Woody Landscape Plants, you learned it as Porcelain ampelopsis. The U.S. Forest Service uses Amur peppervine, and just a note, where I use that common name, I am citing work from the U.S. Forest Service. Also, I haven't seen it in print anywhere, but it was listed as wild grape, and that is confusing because we have a number of wild grape species abundant in the eastern U.S. And so hopefully that one's not in too great a use. And creeper, I couldn't find any use for it other than thinking that it's a much simpler word to pronounce than all the syllables in Porcelain ampelopsis. It grows as a woody deciduous perennial vine known botanically as liana. It can reach anywhere from 10 to 25 feet in a season. It has the unique feature of tendrils, which wild grape is the only other plant that has that attaching apparatus. The leaf nodes are opposite those tendrils. The leaves themselves are, it's a simple leaf versus a compound, but it's serrated and with hairy petioles separated with three lobes, and the flowers emerge on cymes, which are umbel-like structures, and the fruit tends to be a bit spaced, as we'll see later. The round berry fruit goes through a myriad of colors in its maturation process. The taproot is quite vigorous and impossible to remove once it's established. And it's classified as a chemophytic, which is a subshrub, meaning it dies back in the dormant season and produces overwintering buds in its crown. And it has a perennial root system. It's geophytic in that it has energy storage organs, like the bulb, corm, or rhizome, but in this case, it is a stem tuber. Its impact is such that it can completely cover the outer canopy of a tree, just blanketing it completely down. And not only it can outcompete native plants, but also non-native plants that are used as landscape plants. It has a climbing ability where it can reach into, on its own volition, up into a 4-inch caliber tree. And then the tendrils will start grabbing onto young branches and twigs after that, and it has the capacity to girdle younger shoots on a tree or a shrub, and that especially after it goes dormant, that tendril will lignify, constricting any further developments in the host. twig and branchlet. And then if it's in a tree that already has architectural defects, it can exacerbate those through restricting the photosynthesis that the tree needs, and also possibly a structural compromise in that from the weight and of the vine if it gets thick enough in a tree. This map shows where it has the capacity to spread basically across the entire eastern U.S. The largely shaded area on the East Coast shows where it was introduced and has been colonizing for over 100 years now, close to 150 years. It's interesting, if you look at the county areas on the map where it's at, you'll correlate those to major metropolitan urban areas. Being from Ohio, there's Cincinnati down in the southwest, Cleveland in the northeast, Toledo going up to Michigan and Detroit, Chicago, of course, Madison, Wisconsin, over to the Twin Cities in Minnesota, down to Nashville. And so it's even does quite well in Louisiana and the southern environments. So it has been restricted in sale in Maine, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Ohio, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and there is legislation restricting it pending in Pennsylvania. It's typically an edge species, so anywhere on a fragmented forest edge or opening, you're going to find it in both wooded natural areas and in urban areas. So forest edges, pond margins, and stream banks, and forest wooded areas, and in an urban forest, you can find it along right-of-ways such as roads, railways, and utility right-of-ways. It can move into disturbed sites quite readily on acting as a pioneer plant. Climatically, it prefers temperate zones. It can take freezing temperatures, but it needs to have a degree of moisture, and elevation-wise, you'll find it from elevations of 500 to 2,000 feet. It vectors primarily through its extended flowering period. It flowers from June in Cincinnati, June through August, and can go into September with milder periods. The fruit can be scarified in the digestive tract of small birds and small mammals, and dispersed that way. The fruit is buoyant, so it can flow in riparian systems, and unfortunately spread quite a distance that way. As I mentioned, the extensive growth of the vegetative portion, it moves pretty well with that direction, and underground, the roots are quite voracious, and they tend to sucker and keep spreading in that fashion. Seed germination is pretty high, and in established areas like under a tree canopy where the seedlings are protected, you'll see a multitude of additional shoots coming up, competing with the mother plant. The leaf is typical of this size, of about 5 inch long, 4 inches wide, has 3 lobes, but there is the variety Maximum Witzii, which has the 2 deep sinuses, and then there's originally it was described as a form, Citrulloides, by Alfred Rader back in, I found it in his 1927 publication, but he described it as having 5 pronounced lobes on it. And then there's the lovely variegated form. I found in this whole season going after it, I found, I think, about 4 rogue specimens that actually had the variegation in it. And so it does naturally occur, and apparently it is stable enough, but it's easy to propagate by nurseries, and that's what is part of the problem with this plant. The stem growth, you can see on the right slide how it matures through the season. The tendrils are opposite the leaves, as I mentioned. The tendrils can actually develop into inflorescence, further exacerbating the flowering and fruiting issue. And you can see how just mid-season that older shoot is already beginning to show the bark characteristic kind of patchy, wide, ridged bark pattern. And the shot on the left shows that the phloem wood is a lighter colored wood. The crown is of particular interest, especially for control. The shot you're seeing on the right is probably about a 2-year crown. You can see segments where there has been some lack of bark tissue, so that I would surmise is previous year's growth that has died back. And then the stronger shoots coming out of it are the present year's growth. Keep this in note for when you are treating these plants. This is where you're going to want to administer the cut and treatment. But in this case, you would want to excavate that soil away from the crown to expose the greatest portion of it. The lighter side colored left frame shows how it can sucker readily, even just a very short distance away from the mother crown. And apparently disturbance can help that, any of the crown will help it sucker even that much more. The root system is quite extensive. The taproot is vigorous. The shot on the right shows you the stem tuber-like quality of the roots. In our river edge soils here that we have, and we were subjected to the Illinoisan glaciation that was 120,000 years ago, and we have a depth of about 90 feet of loess and loam to get down to the bedrock. And so this the areas in the southern part of the cemetery are quite conducive, the lighter soils. In fact, I always tell people that if something won't grow at Spring Grove, it will not grow in Cincinnati. But typically the root system is difficult to remove out of that plant unless you have a light soil like this. And you can see how extensive that it can develop, and that's just a 1-year plant. The flowers are quite minuscule. They're only 1 to 2 millimeters in diameter. It's a hermaphroditic flower, meaning it has both sexes, and it's a protandrous flower, meaning that the male flower opens up first. And if you look at that center floret flower, you can see the petal, 5 petals have abscised. The sepals are in the process of abscising, and the anthers are retracted back as they are ready to abscise. The male portion of the flower will persist for about 1 day, and then the female portion of the flower, the gymnosium, will open up, and that will persist for 2 to 3 days. In that disc is a copious quantity of nectar, and of course the pollen is released off the male portion of the flower, or before actually the petals start opening. The pollinators for this plant are quite interesting. I've observed a small predator-like wasp, and it's just completely covered over the flowering. Added with a few, but not many, yellow jackets, and then just 1 or 2 honeybees. And it's a feeding frenzy. When you see them on there, I've pulled them out of the tree that they're in flower, and all those insects just fly off to the next flower that's been undisturbed. But from the U.S. Forest Service, their observation of the floral insect visitors and pollen attachment of Amur peppervine indicated that native ground nesting scoliid wasp species Scolididae oculata is an effective pollinator at all sites. In addition, a large amount of yellow pollen from this plant was attached to the mandible of the scoliid wasp. And then most of the flower visiting insects observed in Guelph, Ontario, and East Central Canada, where Amur peppervine has been introduced, are bees. The fruit will go through this morphed development of different colors until it reaches a deep blue maturity. I could not find anywhere in literature that correlates the color of the fruit to the viability of the seed, which I think is important to know. Obviously, the early green structured colored fruit is not going to produce a viable germ, but somewhere along that line, that seed becomes viable. The seed ranges in size from 0.2 to 0.33 of an inch in diameter, which is 5 to 8 millimeters. It has a fruit set of unbagged flowers that range from 22.4 to 55.1%, with an average of 36.4%. The fruiting season basically starts in August, and going back to the flowering, at that time in August, you can have an inflorescence that has the male flower, the female flower, and immature fruit on it all at once. And so it's quite voracious, as I said. The seed itself is ovoid and smooth and triangular in shape. It measures about 3.5 millimeters in length. Each fruit can contain up to 4 seeds. In this sampling I had, the bottom 4 fruits had 2 seeds each, and the top one had 1. In Japan, seed rain was surveyed every 1 or 2 weeks for approximately 8 months in 1987 on 6 plots containing 4 seed traps each. During that time, seed traps on 1 plot averaged 133 amaretto pepper seeds per meter square, while seed traps on the remaining 5 plots had no amaretto pepper seed. Seed is dispersed by birds and small animals, as I mentioned. White-tailed deer also eat its fruit, and may or may not disperse the seed. I've seen enough deer pellets around, but usually that's that little uniform black pellet, and with no residual coloration in it. Seed banking was information was typically not available, but during a 2-year grassland study in Japan, amaretto pepper vine seeds emerged infrequently, averaging only 1.5 seedlings per meter squared the first year, and 0.1 seedlings meter squared in the second year. Amaretto pepper vine seed has a high germination rate and readily germinates following soil disturbance. Seed germination appears to occur throughout the growing season, which is evident here. Germination of the seed may be enhanced by removing the fruit pulp or scarifying seed through digestion. Moist chilling may also stimulate germination of amaretto pepper vine seed. In Japan, 53% of amaretto pepper vine seeds germinated when placed in moist, cool conditions for 1 month and then exposed to increasing temperatures. Researchers speculated that moist chilling of amaretto pepper vine seed had a dormancy breaking effect. Porcelain berry is amenable to sandy, light textured soils, loamy, medium textured soils, and heavy clay textured soils, and it can also tolerate nutritionally poor soils. It is pH adaptable. That's firsthand knowledge, because I roam back and forth between Cleveland, where the soil pH is 5, and it's a pH of 8 down here, and in both cities, the population of porcelain berry is quite noticeable. And then it can grow in semi-shade, as in a light woodland or no shade, but it does prefer moist soil. The bud break occurs in May, and because amaretto pepper vine is slow to leaf out, most vegetative growth may occur in late summer, but there is definitely a shot of growth that is quite aggressive to get it to the outer canopy of the tree so that it can start flowering in May. So reviews from North America indicate that amaretto pepper vine flowers during midsummer, but may begin as early as June in some cities, and that is the case here in Cincinnati. It'd be interesting to see in Chicago, where you're, I guess, about 2 zones cooler now, when it starts flowering there. Fruit begins to develop again late summer and matures in the fall. Growth continues right until the first hard frost. Within a week of the first, after the first frost, all but the first order and possibly a few of the oldest second order shoots have upsized. Some of the fruit will overwinter on the vine, and then overwintering buds, which are not externally visible, develop at the base of the crown at the end of the growing season. In a grassland community in Japan, Amur peppervine seedlings typically emerge by mid-May, but some do not emerge until mid-June. And I've noticed this here, that seedling germination likely parallels the time of bud break. Now, and also seeing that it does have a later bud break than other species, I surmise that because the bud break occurs when the canopy trees are beginning to open, that it's using the foliage of the canopy to protect itself from predation of sorts. With vegetative regeneration, it can occur quite readily. It's been described as by having extensive underground growth. One report indicated that Amur peppervine may increase rapidly during a growing season by producing copious sucker shoots, and this can definitely occur when if the crown has been cut and not treated. Recommendations for Amur peppervine control and management indicate that Amur peppervine sprouts after its above ground stem is cut, and again, where it can sprout from roots or roots suckering from the roots. Under cultivation, it's easy to propagate. Suggests that a firm leaf midsummer can root if placed in rooting media, and reviews indicate that Amur peppervine regenerates from root segments. The original research and reviews agree that Amur peppervine prefers full sun but tolerates partial shade. Plants that primarily occur on forest edges and openings like Amur peppervine typically require high light intensities to thrive. Based on field observations, Amur peppervine is shade intolerant. Amur peppervine has been studied from a successional perspective in Japan and Pennsylvania, and based on these studies, Amur peppervine likely occurs in early successional habitats. In New England, Amur peppervine is considered an early successional species in forest. In Japan, Amur peppervine occurs on sites undergoing primary succession following volcanic eruptions. It was more frequent on a 37-year-old lava field at a 41 to 60% frequency than on a 125-year-old lava field at 21 to 40% frequency. In a study in southeastern Pennsylvania, it was reported that Amur peppervine's abundance in various successional stages, it was abundant in various successional stages, and found it was common in uniform stands of mixed deciduous trees, and was least common in mature forests with extremely dense shade. Amur peppervine's abundance was greatest in riparian forests that had experienced repeated disturbance. Researchers speculated that Amur peppervine's abundance in riparian areas may have been more a function of seed dispersal than a preference for a particular seral stage. They speculated that given enough time, Amur peppervine may spread to mature forests. In New York, Amur peppervine seedlings planted in a hardwood forest persisted under an intact canopy, but grew better under canopy gaps, suggesting that while Amur peppervine may grow in mature forests, it may be more abundant on forest edges or under canopy gaps rather than in deep shade. Heavy infestations of Amur peppervine may influence succession by killing supportive vegetation, such as trees and shrubs, and preventing seedling emergence. It grows optimally in well-drained and evenly moist soils, and it is drought tolerant, and that comes from firsthand observation in both 2022 and this past season. We had no rain from August to October, and it showed no effects of drought that other plants were experiencing. It does produce a yellow fall color if it goes through a normal season, but in a milder season, the foliage will persist until It's hit with a freeze, and then it just drops off green from the vine. Fortunately, that shot you see of a New York Botanic Garden has not. I have not seen that here yet, but that is a frightening potential of what can be if if porcelain berry is left untreated. In comparison to grape, which is, again is the only other plant that is a lookalike, the wild grapes. There's a number of wild grape species, so many grape species have a deeper serrated leaf than porcelain berry, but that may not always be the case. Looking at the immature shoot of each one, the lenticels are much more prevalent on porcelain berry than on wild grape. And then on the maturing first year wood, you'll see that grape has a very thin, uniform, peeling and shaggy bark that is not as evident. It's more of the patchy, plated bark on a porcelain berry, and if you cut through it, the pith is going to be different. White on porcelain berry and dark on wild grape. The climbing habit is different, and that may help in the identification of it. Grape species tend to stay under the canopy, inside the canopy of a mature tree, whereas porcelain berry will come out to the outer canopy. The fruit is going to be clustered on a grape and usually a bit larger. And you can see the fruit on porcelain berry on that cyme infructescent is more sporadic. Grape, there should be discernment given to grape when controlling porcelain berry, because grape fruit is an important overwintering and late season food for birds and small animals. There is a native species of Ampelopsis, heartleaf pepper vine. That leaf is readily different, appears different than the porcelain berry that we've all come to know. I heard from the state botanist in Ohio that is a rare plant, and I haven't found anyone around here who has actually seen one. Ampelopsis arborea should be confused only in name, because that is a southern species of pepper vine, which is also has the compound leaf, but that is native to Louisiana, maybe going up into the Ozarks. And once Amaretto pepper vine is established, it is extremely difficult to control, and eradication is doubtful. Recommended control methods for Amaretto pepper vine tend to be labor intensive and slow to show effects. Amaretto pepper vine's potential for long-range seed dispersal and ongoing intentional planting of it make it control more difficult. Restricting the sale of Amaretto pepper vine may reduce future establishment and spread. The most cost-efficient and effective method of managing invasive species is to prevent their establishment and spread by maintaining healthy natural communities, by avoiding disturbance in wildlands, and by monitoring those areas several times a year. Tulip poplar, red maple, or gap species like American cherry can be planted as an integrated management plan, or part of an integrated management plan, to fill forest canopy gaps where no such younger trees exist. Porcelain berry seedlings emerge under low canopy trees and drip lines, making control of it that much more difficult, especially in urban landscapes. But private property owners are the ones who can best monitor their landscapes for emergence and control of Amaretto pepper vine and other invasive plants. The young plants can be physically removed. I find with a soil knife, you can get down to a plant with 4 nodes or so, can be readily removed with a soil knife. Recommendations of mowing and cutting without herbicide use is going to take more vigilance and monitoring, because The resprouts can come from the crown or from root suckers that come from other places on the root system. One review recommended. Oh no, I'm sorry. Okay. So prioritizing early season control is absolutely the best method because you're preventing the vectoring of any further seed source. And if when controlling in a large area like here, we were pulling it out of trees when it already was in fruit, and we made a particular effort to remove those vines from the sites and make sure they were destroyed. Later in the season, as the fruits ripen, the fruiting infractescens will break off, leaving fruit tangled around the shoots where the tendrils have acted as both holding and as fruiting device. So it's important to try and retrieve those fruiting cymes with the fruit on them in order to prevent more germination. And of course, even where it has been eradicated, the site should be monitored for sprouting, any resprouting or seed germination. The U.S. Forest Service identified 4 natural enemies of porcelain berry, but no further information had been identified on that. Herbicide control, again, is with this plant, it really is an essential method of eradication, or at least control. You'll see that the top photo shows that the cut was made on a swollen portion of that crown, and that exposes the greatest amount of surface area to allow treatment. And you want to make that treatment as soon as the cut is made, so as to prevent the vascular system from closing off. And then use a dye if in your treatment herbicide, so that you know what's been treated. And again, if you're treating a older crown that's been submerged in the soil, excavate that soil away from the crown before cutting and treating it. I found this acrylic dabber for treatment. The applicator is spring-loaded, and it applies treatment only when depressed, and so that keeps the product on the crown that where the cut was made. And of course, you're going to wear gloves with this, but the ideal part of this design is that when that cylinder is empty, the applicator can be unscrewed and placed in the cap, and then with the cylinder, after the cylinder has been refilled, you can flip the cap back onto the cylinder and screw it back in place without ever having to touch the applicator tip. And again, of course, you're wearing protective gloves with this, so but it's still a good practice to minimize any waste of the product. And again, as I said before, we want to prioritize early season control and removal of the vines and fruits that persist. I find that Tordon RTU is ready to use, is the best product. It is a brush killer. It tends to move less in the soil than triclopyr, and with that use in the applicator I just showed, I think it makes it a one and done deal as far as control. The Tordon itself comes in a the cap is similar to what you find on a bottle of dish soap. So you just pull that open, fill the cylinder, and then there will be one hydroscopic drop clinging to the tip of that cap. So have a paper towel handy to clean that off, and then you're ready to go. The U.S. Forest Service had some recommendations that I want to go through and just discuss some of the prospects of it. So they mentioned that herbicides such as triclopyr and phosphate are effective. One review recommended a foliar application of glyphosate in early autumn. Good luck. I'm sorry. That's awfully dangerous. Trying not to create any collateral damage. Basal bark applications of triclopyr formulated for use with penetrating oil control amber peppervine, but precaution must be made not to harm other woody species. Correct. Experimental treatments to control amber peppervine indicated that herbicides controlled amber peppervine when used in conjunction with mowing. If you go in and do the stump cut and treat at that time, you're not going back a second time looking for a cut that was done previously, and you're saving time, which is of the essence with this in a large infestation. It's been suggested that large amber peppervine vines can be targeted for broad applications of herbicide, and smaller vines be spot sprayed. Again, I think one cut at the base is the most efficient, most proficient, and effective way of treating this. And then I've seen glyphosate at 20% solutions, which is recommended also by U.S. Forest Service. That could be effective, but again, you'd want to add a dye, a marker dye to that to at least know where you've been treating. And then this worries me. From summer to fall, apply a water-based solution of 2.5% Garland 3A triclopyramine to foliage or to cut plants after regrowth occurs. Again, it's redundancy. But and finally, a 20 to 30% Garland 4, which is triclopyr ester, mixed with commercially available basal oil, horticultural oil, diesel fuel number 1 or number 2 fuel oil, or kerosene, which are all acceptable adjuvants on the label for mixing, but recommended to treat 2 to 3 foot long sections of the stem near the base of the vines. But something like that is going to move through the soil, and there's a good chance you're going to see collateral damage. So again, through the integrated approach of removing seedlings that can be easily removed, and removing residual fruit that's in the plant that you're controlling, and treating stump cut treating, and applying herbicide right after the cut is made is the most effective means of control. So, and with that, I guess we can open up the questions here.
Hey, Dave, thanks so much. We had a couple early questions about differentiating it from native grape, which I think you covered. I think if anyone still has questions about that, maybe pop your updated question in the chat. And there was a question, well, a couple interesting comments. We did have one person say that they've seen this in Kansas City. So I don't, just for your own interest.
Okay.
And then some of the other pepper vines that you mentioned, we had someone say that they had seen those in southern Indiana. So just a couple interesting observations I thought I'd share with you. There was a question about one of the close-ups you had of the root crown. There's some young leaves in the photo, and they just wanted to clarify if those were ivy or if those were young porcelain berry leaves. I think
Unfortunately, so this one is porcelain berry.
Okay.
And this is this was growing under the canopy of a tree with lily turf, and there was ivy under here. Whether
I think if you go one more, I think.
Oh, this was a 27-foot length of porcelain berry I pulled out of a tree.
Wow.
This is English ivy.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
unfortunately, it was thought in the logic was in the 80s and 90s that if ivies were planted under the tree rings that they wouldn't have to weed. And so, and come circa 2010, they finally realized that, oh, a problem's been created with those plants. So
And then there was one other question that I think you've addressed as well, but about if the roots can be removed. And I think you said if the plants were young or the soil was particularly loose, that might be possible. Do you want to elaborate any more on that?
um, you'll find that the roots have an elasticity to them, and if they start stretching and they don't look like they're going to move, then cut it off at that point and treat the root at that point where you've made your cut. And with that, I would cut the root at an angle, so again you're getting the greatest amount of surface area to treat that remaining root in the plant with.
Okay. And then there was a question here from Jeff. I might need you to elaborate. It says, I haven't seen a spring loaded before. This must be a tool you referenced.
That's to the applicator.
Okay.
That was something that we found. This is actually a tool of graffiti artists, but if you go online and just Google acrylic daubers, something like this product will come up. You can usually get them in packets of 6, and they're fairly inexpensive. But it's a great tool for herbicide application. I've seen in the past where people would try and brush herbicide on or spray, and the spray would overshoot the target site, whereas this stays strictly on the target itself.
Wonderful. Well, I just want to thank you again. If anyone hasn't been monitoring the chat, there are quite a few links in there. You can learn more about Spring Grove Arboretum and Dave's work. There's a link in here to the Woody Invasives of the Great Lakes Collaborative website. We have a whole page dedicated to this plant, so you can learn a little more about ID and management. And I think if you're available, Dave, we can maybe stay in a couple more minutes if anybody has questions, but I realize that we've gone over our time just a smidge. So if anyone needs to go, please feel free, and we'll stay on for a couple minutes for any last minute questions. But thanks so much. We appreciate you all being here and for all the webinars you've attended this year. Okay, we do have a question. Are the berries edible?
They are not palatable. They are edible. They're not poisonous, but they are not very palatable.
Okay, and then we have a question here. We have an area with quite a bit of porcelain berry. We were planning to follow up with foliar spraying. Would that work on small resprouts?
On the resprouts, as long as it has to be monitored because it can get out of control pretty quick. Using a fecon is going to it must be an area that's completely overrun in vegetation. So your best bet is to go through that fecon and to if you can clean off the area a bit, but just watch for the resprouts and treat those. That's one of the Cincinnati parks actually used that strategy in trying to control porcelain berry.
Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions. So I think we're all set. And again, just a reminder, we will post this recording before the end of the year. And we are planning a new series for next year. So we hope you'll join us again in 2024. Have a great end of the year, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate your time.